So that situation there was a direct tie in there between the CAP cadet program, the Navy program, which didn't even have a cadet program like the CAP did, and then finally the Air Force. So in a very quick period from 1943 until 1948, I went from flying light planes and getting my light plane training and my original aviation ticket, my private ticket. Went directly from there to the Navy, where I got no flying experience at all. It was all academic. But I did get 2 years of military school out of it. And then almost directly into the aviation cadet program with the Air Force. So there was some continuity there, which required me to stay in touch with what was actually going on in the military and in civil aviation as well. Because my long-range plan at that time was to do whatever the minimum required and then get out of the military and go make some money in the airlines, right? Well, that all changed, because once I got into what I happened to get into, the civil aviation situation lost all its interest with me. Because when I graduated from flying school, I asked for and immediately went with a few guys into the Strategic Air Command at the United States Air Force. And believe it or not, the wing that I was assigned to was at Walker Air Force Base near Roswell, New Mexico. Okay. Well, there was some real nonsense going on at Roswell, New Mexico, but it didn't have anything to do with the Strategic Air Command. What was significant was the Strategic Air Command wing that dropped both of those atomic weapons in Japan was the 509th Bomb Wing at Roswell, New Mexico. And that was the only nuclear qualified wing we had. The only wing that we had that was able and that was trained to be able to pick up the weapon and go use it someplace. Well, it wasn't a very clear picture. The first commandant of the Strategic Air Command had been told that they were the only unit in the United States Air Force who had this enormous power. We had the only nuclear Air Force in the whole world, and nobody better mess with us. And that's pretty much what President Truman had said. He was kind of an old-fashioned guy, and he did make statements like that. We have this capability, and if we have to use it to maintain peace in the world, we will, because we have this ordinance, and we have these atomic weapons that are in special, hidden, secret places. Well, the fact was we had about 5 of these weapons. We didn't have this huge stable of weapons that he said we had. And the 509th Bomb Wing was the only bomb wing in the United States Air Force who had that capability. They had the training left over from World War II, and most of those guys weren't even there. They had decided they wanted to go back to civilian life like almost all people did from World War II. But they did have a very few weapons, including components. Actually, what happened, and a lot of people, I would venture to say that there are very few people in this country who even know this happened. The situation was so confused that Charles Lindbergh was hired to survey the Strategic Air Command. What did it really consist of? And he did his usual fantastic job and came back and reported to Hap Arnold, who was the commanding general of the Air Force at the time, that it was really chaotic. we probably had enough components to make maybe 5 weapons. There was no arsenal. There was no capability to destroy anybody in the world, like Harry Truman had said. And this is all true. And but anyway, that's the unit I was assigned to. And there were 3 of us. There were second lieutenants, just been commissioned, you know. And we reported on the same day at Roswell and signed in and met the few people that were still there and happened to be, you know, available. And we began to get bits and pieces of this information, except they couldn't tell us anything that was classified, top secret, you know. When you graduate from a situation like that, you have what they call an interim secret. It's a very minimal clearance. It's not even a full secret clearance. It's called the interim secret clearance. Until the FBI had completed a very extensive investigation into your background, and they would grant you a secret clearance, and then finally a top secret clearance. But we began to get bits and pieces of this information. What we did learn that was true was the 509th Bomb Wing, which today is the only unit that's flying the B-2s out of a base in Missouri. They used people, we called them a cadre. People who were in the 509th were split into 3 cadres. One stayed in Roswell with the 509th, and the other 2 cadres of personnel, one went to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in near Tucson, and the other one went to Biggs Air Force Base near El Paso. So now we had 3 units who were, quote, capable of dropping those weapons, which really didn't even exist. They were just components. Now, this was 1950. And here we were with President Truman telling everybody, including Russia, that you better behave or, you know, I'll clean your can. And we had no capability to do that. And we, little by little, we began to find this out. I was very proud to be in the 509th. I stayed there for 3 years and got my education in nuclear weaponry, how to load it, how to drop it, what to do with it, how those processes were built so that they fit together to make a weapon system. And that was a little bit startling because you didn't really understand the significance of it. And I'll give you a big example of that. The AEC was the Atomic Energy Commission, and they were the ones that had designed and built the weapons, right? Okay. At places like Los Alamos and the 4 or 5 other bases that there weren't really military bases. They were property of the AEC. However, the Strategic Air Command with the United States Air Force was the only unit that was authorized to use those gigantic weapons systems. Well, General LeMay took over Curtis LeMay had taken over the command of SAC, Strategic Air Command. And that's the first thing he realized. He said, this is not right. We can't have these bases located in strategic positions with the aircraft and with the trained crews, but the weapons are in secret underground storage areas somewhere else in the United States. Now just stop and think about that. If we were going to use these weapons, thank God we never did, but if we were going to, we had to know exactly where they were, and SAC really had to have control of those weapons. And this still really hasn't been read very much about or taught very much about. It has been documented, and I know where those bases were then. They're not there anymore. SAC has them now, and the Navy. The Navy has some too, different kinds for their torpedo. But That was the God's truth. Here we were with this ridiculous situation where the unit that was going to use these weapons was the Strategic Air Command in the U.S. Air Force. But all the weapons were buried in the secret underground storage areas around the United States. Actually, there were 6 of them. And, you know, after a while you began to realize that what we have here is potentially the biggest weapon system in the world, and one that you don't want to mess with. But it took 3 years for General LeMay to confess or to convince the president and the cabinet that this was not the way to run a war. If we were ever going to have that situation, that had to be changed, and the AEC had to give up those weapons to the Air Force. And they finally did. They finally did. And that was a major victory for General LeMay. And after that, people in the Senate and the House began to realize how powerful General LeMay was. He had with all the presidents that he served under, he had the confidence and the understanding with all of those people from the president on down that he could get anything done he wanted to, because he had friends in the Senate and the House who were willing to give him the money to do it. Obviously, the Navy hated this. Boy, did they hate it. And finally, because of the naval torpedoes and atomic weaponry that they put in their submarines, he had to go along with the fact that the Navy had to have their share of the weapons and their type of weapons in places where they could be quickly used if they were going to. But I had great respect for the man. I still appreciate greatly what he did and the power that he had to be able to get things done that needed to be done for the safety of the country. And I took part in a lot of that because I was a B-29 co-pilot, first of all, because I was second lieutenant. But I very quickly gained confidence in the material we were using and learned how to arm the weapons, which you had to be cleared with a top secret clearance to do that, and gradually proceeded from the right seat of the airplane to the left seat of the airplane and became an airplane commander in the B-29. And then went on from that to the B-50. The B-50 was a very advanced version of the B-29, and from there to the B-47, which was my favorite. Am I loose here? Yeah. The mic.
Yeah, can't lose.
It was obviously my fault because I put the microphone on.
Yeah, you're forgiven.
How does that sound?
There you go. So I made pretty rapid progress, and by the time I got into B-47s, which was the first wing I was in B-47s was a wing at near Shreveport, Barksdale Air Force Base. And by the time we got there, we were able to see very quickly that the B-29 and the B-50 were already archaic. They were out of the system. No longer were they going to be able to compete with the Russian jet fighters. Couldn't do that. The B-47 could, and the B-52, which I eventually wound up in. But in my 20 years in SAC, so I had 25 years total service, counting the service that I was in the National Guard and in the Navy. But 20 of those 25 years were in SAC airplanes, flying SAC airplanes, which was the most powerful military force ever in the history of the world. And I doubt if there'll ever be one that strong again.